Hello, my name is Andy and I am the Village Idiot. I'm armed with a car and a GoPro and an unhealthy amount of time on my hands. I'm using that time to attempt to visit every civil parish in England. You're watching the Harrogate series. Harrogate is a large borough, one of the 11 districts of North Yorkshire. It's got 139 civil parishes. Which one are we in this episode? Welcome back to Harrogate, everybody, and behind me there you can see a very nice tall landmark right here in this town centre. We've been looking forward to this one for quite a while actually. We've been sort of circling the edges of it with the villages around it, and now it's time to cover the whole thing itself. Welcome to the beautiful town of Boroughbridge. Here's my disclaimer for people who may be watching me for the first time. I say things as I would in my native accent and dialect. As a result, I may not pronounce things in the same way as the locals do. Remember, I'm a visitor. It's impossible to know everything. Leave me a comment, spin me a like, and bash that subscribe button. Let's get to today's parish video. Boroughbridge, Fort Bridge. Next up in the Harrogate series we have Boroughbridge, the small town that we've been talking so much about over the past few episodes. Take everything you already know about the town from those videos and keep it handy in your mind, because at various points throughout this video we will be referencing some bits. Boroughbridge sits to the south of the River Ure, with the villages of Langthorpe and Milby providing its northern neighbours. To the south are the likes of Staveley and Marton-cum-Grafton, and to the west is the A1M, although centuries ago Boroughbridge was an important staging post on the Great North Road. Although it's the main settlement within the parish of the same name, Boroughbridge's historical importance is second only to the village just to the east of the town. That would be Aldborough, a principal settlement during the Roman period, once known as Isurium Brigantum. Deer Street, the Roman road heading north from York, originally crossed the River Ure just to the north of Aldborough, but at an unknown date it was later diverted to cross the river at Boroughbridge instead. When a new town grew up around that bridge, that would lead to the modern names of the two places. The modern parish also includes the village of Minskip too. There's a lot here, so let's get cracking and see what Boroughbridge is all about. We start in Minskip, just to the southwest of the main town. Landmark number 1 is St John's Church at the southernmost tip of this long linear village. Now, as you'll no doubt know, normally churches are simple enough for us to cover. It's a case of when it was built and a bit of architectural interest. However here, think more along the lines of education instead. This was originally Minskip's village school, built in 1858 and converted into an Anglican church in 1907. That explains the lack of a sizable churchyard. The 3 Minskip men who died in World War I have a memorial in its altar rail. Virtually next door is the village hall, and unlike the old school, this has always been a communal venue. The hall was built in the early 1900s and it's been serving Minskip ever since, providing a space for events, meetings and other local gatherings. Speaking of events, there was one ongoing whilst I was here. Check out these likely characters. These lovely beings were created for the annual Minskip Scarecrow Festival, the main fundraising activity for St John's Church. The theme for the 2024 event was When I Grow Up I Want to Be. The winning entry was picked by BBC Radio York. For the rest of Minskip, I opted to use the car simply because this is a linear settlement. It's mostly housing otherwise, although there is also a pub which we'll come to shortly. There's also an old chapel on the left-hand side of this road too, see if you can spot it. Now the name Minskip appears in the Domesday Book as Mineskip. It derives from the Old English word Gemanskip, which means community or communal holding. It was historically a township in the parish of Aldborough before becoming a separate civil parish in 1866. It was later abolished and merged into Boroughbridge instead. Here's the pub. It's called the Wild Swan. This has been part of the community in Minskip for nearly 200 years, dating back as it does to 1832. After a period of stopping and starting over the last couple of years, the Wild Swan now has a full restaurant after a renovation, a brand new beer garden, and also some plans to add some accommodation in the future too. That all sounds great. Let's head to Aldborough next, the most historic settlement here. No visit to Aldborough could possibly omit this, literally the most important historical landmark in the Boroughbridge area. This is a museum run by English Heritage, which houses many artefacts from the days when this village was the bustling Roman town of Isurium Brigantum. This town marked the point where the Roman Deer Street, running north from York to Corbridge and onto Hadrian's Wall, crossed the River Ure. The museum is simply known as Aldborough Roman Town, and although it sits on the site of the Roman settlement, it's important to note that so too did the entire village. Aldborough has had plenty of interest from both archaeologists and historians given its Roman connections. There have been extensive geophysical surveys here, not only of the Roman town, but also of its suburbs. It had a regular layout, likely with a military compound, a forum, and an amphitheatre. In pretty much every way, it was a typical Roman town, but of course it didn't last. In 160 AD, after England's period of Roman occupation came to an end, Isurium Brigantum became the administrative centre of the Brigantes, the most populous British tribe in the area, whose land extended as far away as York. Wandering around Aldborough today doesn't reveal many clues to all of this, but there are more modern historical landmarks here. On the village green, we have one that connects it with World War II. This memorial was erected in 1994 to mark the 50th anniversary of a plane crash which occurred in February 1944. The Lancaster bomber of 432 Squadron Royal Canadian Air Force came down on Studforth Hill, a short distance to the south. Its crew were based at Eastmoor, near Sutton-on-the-Forest. In front of that we have a set of stocks which originally stood in Boroughbridge's marketplace. Towering above everything on the green is this massive maypole. It's about 50 feet high with narrow red and blue spirals on its shaft. It originally stood on a different part of the green, but that was deemed too close to the site of an annual bonfire, so a move was needed for reasons of safety. Now the green is cut into 4 triangles by 2 roads which crisscross it, forming a central X shape. Let's head down one of those next as we begin to form a loop around the village. In doing so, we pass the vicarage. It's not a listed building, and here in Aldborough, that actually puts it in the minority. Okay, we're about halfway around Aldborough here. It's one of those villages, isn't it, that does have quite a lot in and of itself, but the way parish boundaries are, it's lumped together with Minskip and with Boroughbridge, so it doesn't get its own episode, unfortunately. There's loads here, though. Something else this place has got is Aldborough Hall, and that is where we're heading now. We can't actually see Aldborough Hall because it's up a private drive, the end of which is marked by these gates within a high wall. Grade 2 listed and originally built in the early 17th century, a further wing was added to the north in the Victorian period but was later demolished. When it was put up for sale in 1999, Aldborough Hall was worth almost £1 million. Inside the house are several fittings brought from elsewhere, including a late medieval fireplace, a Jacobean staircase from Lymore, and panelling from Ashley Park. Not every building is like that here in Aldborough. The next one is a little more modest. This quaint little pub, called the Ship Inn, was built in the late 16th century. Its current owners believed that 3 ghosts once haunted it, and so they held a requiem mass to let them rest in peace. Prince William, Prince Harry, and Gordon Ramsay have all visited the ship in recent times. On its wall there's a huge number 700. That's a reference to the 700th anniversary of the Battle of Boroughbridge. More on that shortly. Its other main claim to fame is its food. Renowned for its Yorkshire puddings and gravy, it was this pub which led to the creation of the Real Gravy campaign. Next, it's the church. Dedicated to St Andrew and dating from the 14th century, it's believed this stands on the site of a Roman temple to Mercury. 2 churches successfully occupied this site before the present building. In 1318 it was partly destroyed by raiders from Scotland, but was repaired. A chantry chapel was added in 1333 and a north aisle in about 1360. The clerestory dates from the 15th century, the roof was restored in the 16th century, and the south aisle was rebuilt in 1827. The whole thing was given a Grade 1 listing in 1966. Let's head to the village hall now. The village hall was originally Aldborough's national school, but in much the same way as Minskip, it has a different use today. It's what's in front of this though that's way more interesting. This is the battle cross. 18 feet tall, this was erected to commemorate the Battle of Boroughbridge in 1322. The cross itself is probably 15th century and originally stood in Boroughbridge's marketplace. The top parts have been damaged in the past and reassembled with dubious accuracy, according to Pevsner. Aldborough Manor rounds off the walk. Several Roman artefacts were found in the grounds of this building in 1863. Okay, so from the village hall it's very simple to get back to the start. All you have to do is walk up the gentle hill, shall we say, alongside the village green. It'll take you back towards the Roman town. There are 2 things to see just before we leave Aldborough behind. There's one of them. You can see that's an old chapel behind me there. And right next door to that old chapel, there's also the old post office. This building here, just to the right. Let's drive to Boroughbridge now, and on the way, we're going to check out some sports grounds. Just before we start the main town, let's learn a bit more about the Battle of Boroughbridge. It was fought on the 16th of March 1322 between a group of rebellious barons and the forces of King Edward II. It was the culmination of a long period of antagonism between the king and Thomas, the Earl of Lancaster. The battle would result in Lancaster's defeat and execution, ending the Despencer War. This allowed Edward to re-establish royal authority and hold on to power for almost 5 more years. Edward II was a weak and ineffectual king, and his reign was marked by military failure and internal strife. As a result, a great number of rebel barons turned against the king, and Lancaster eventually became the leader of the opposition. The Battle of Boroughbridge saw the total defeat of these rebel forces. It was a small but dramatic battle, or at least it appears so thanks to the graphic detail provided in some contemporary accounts. It was achieved by a royal commander named Andrew Harclay, a veteran of the Scottish Wars. He took a strong position, holding a major river crossing, giving the rebels no alternative but to fight for control. He also used a very effective combination of tactics against the heavily armoured rebel force. These included a defensive wall of spears, copied from the Scots, and an offensive arrow storm provided by his archers. Harclay's victory foreshadowed the devastating success achieved some years later against the French at Crécy. The action was fought for control of a narrow bridge and a nearby ford by which the Great North Road crossed the River Ure. Today, the battlefield has been largely engulfed by the town, but in 1322, Boroughbridge had probably not yet extended as far north as the bridge. The land on either side of the river will have been floodplain meadow instead. When using the road between Aldborough and Boroughbridge, the first landmark to pass on re-entering civilization is a huge sports ground. Football, cricket and tennis are the main sports played here. Now, football-wise, Boroughbridge AFC are the town's current team, and they use the pitch at the back of this complex. They were founded in 1900, and today they sport 3 men's and 1 women's team. The early 1980s and the following 2 decades were a successful time for the club, with many successes in the Harrogate, Cliro and York leagues, as well as the York and Harrogate District Football Association. They're currently in the West Yorkshire Association Football League, and they're nicknamed the Bridge. Flanking the other side of this access road is a primary school. The town only has one of them, and this is it. Last year it celebrated its 90th anniversary with a day full of activities and a look back at its history. And speaking of history, there's way more to discover in the town itself. Our main walk begins on Mill Lane. That there is Bridgend House, a huge block of flats whose top floor offers some excellent views of Boroughbridge Weir. Now they're modern of course, but this house definitely isn't. That's an old mill house. Milling was a prosperous occupation in Boroughbridge, one of several. A lot of trade though was to be had via the Great North Road. At one time, there were 22 inns in Boroughbridge. Here's one of the modern day pubs, which takes its name from a river. Not the Ure though, instead the tap on the Tut is named after a lesser known river, which we'll cross later. Heading south, next we have an old bank. I've no idea which bank once occupied this building, but today Mallard Homes occupy the premises. Over the road at this point is the massive Crown Hotel. This was originally a manor house often frequented by William Tankard or Tancred, an MP in the mid-16th century. It was often the meeting place for the Council of the North, where local notables, led by the Earls of Northumberland and Westmoreland, planned to free Mary Queen of Scots, dispose of Queen Elizabeth I, and restore the old religion. William Tankard died in 1573, and he's buried in Aldborough. Next, we come to a plaque on another large white building. This one tells us about Captain Archie White, a recipient of the Victoria Cross for his conspicuous bravery on the Western Front in 1916 as part of the Yorkshire Regiment. The plaque marks the spot of the tailor shop owned by his family. By the way, this street is called Horsefair, which follows the route of the Great North Road. As well as inns for travellers, other vitally important amenities were located along here. When the town was bypassed in 1963, Boroughbridge lost traffic on the Great North Road for the first time in 800 years. Now, by no means is that all of the town centre. In fact, it's not even half of it. The very end of this walking route will catch the rest of it. It's all clustered together around a square. But before we get to that, we've got to go to some more sort of further flung places, if you like, go around the town centre. Next to head for is an old chapel. I think it might even be still in use, just a bit further along this road. Let's check it out and see if it is. Very much still in use, it was built as a Wesleyan Methodist chapel in 1864, and originally it could seat 431 people. By 1940 though, this number had reduced to 340. The interior is still typical of a mid-19th century Wesleyan chapel, complete with a pulpit and an organ. Not far away from that I found this great little garden. Dubbed the D-Day Garden, this corner has been filled with pretty flowers to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the landings in World War II. It's on the end of Chatsworth Grove, and that's where we're going next. It's residential for a short way, so I'll see you shortly. Okay, so now we're facing a field. Now normally, said field would be a little less full of crops and you would be able to see the devil's arrows. Now what exactly are the devil's arrows, you may ask? Well, they're a set of stones and one of them is by a roadside. Let's go and check that out and see exactly the history behind these. The Devil's Arrows are a magnificent set of 3 stones standing 660 feet to the east of the A1M. Legend has it that the devil threw these stones, hence the name. He was aiming for Aldborough, but missed. Given their similarity to them, it's more likely these were transported here from Plumpton Rocks. Erected in prehistoric times, the tallest stone is 22.5 feet tall, only slightly shorter than the Rudston monolith. There were 4 of them, but one was pulled down in a vain attempt to find buried treasure in the 18th century. Its remains were later used as the base for a bridge over the River Tut. Now to make our way east again. On the very same road as the Devil's Arrows is Boroughbridge Manor Care Home. This is designed to cater for people aged 65 or over who have dementia or other care needs such as physical disabilities. Aside from that, there's not a lot along Rowcliffe Lane. You will perhaps notice a couple of side streets which make reference to the Devil's Arrows though. These are Arrows Terrace and Arrows Crescent, but they're nothing greatly special. Soon enough, the end of the road comes into view, and we're about to turn south again, this time towards a school. Back onto Horsefair, next we're faced with the Renault garage. Just beyond that, there's a bridge which crosses the River Tut. There are 2 other minor watercourses in the parish, Longlands Drain, which flows into the Tut at Minskip, and Low Common Drain, which meets the Ure in Aldborough. Horsefair has now become Wetherby Road, and a few more steps brings us to the cemetery. It was founded in the late 1800s, presumably at a time when churchyards were becoming overcrowded. There are 5 Commonwealth war graves in this one, 3 are from World War I, and 2 are from World War II. Okay, so in terms of walking, we've reached the route's southernmost point. We'll take a left turn now and start heading back north towards the town centre again. Behind me there, you can see Boroughbridge's secondary school. Let's talk a bit about that next. Unfortunately, given the time of day, I couldn't really get close to Boroughbridge High School because there were a lot of children around. It was awarded Specialist Arts status in 2003, and the last time it was inspected by Ofsted, they reckoned it was good. Notable former pupils of the school include Darren Sadler, a repeat competitor at the World's Strongest Man competition, despite his comparatively small stature. Now we've turned around, and after passing this playground, we need to head east along Springfield Road. Again, it's all residential for a short way, so I'll see you on Church Lane. On the end of Church Lane is the Hideaway, which is some sort of eatery these days, but I reckon this used to be a pub. It's got all the hallmarks. Also on Church Lane is a surgery, and that's virtually bang next door. Of course, the most prominent landmark in this part of town is obvious, and that's the Church of St James. This is not the first church Boroughbridge has ever had. A medieval church once stood in St James's Square a few hundred yards away from where this building is. It was pulled down in 1851 and replaced with this, although this does incorporate some items from its predecessor. The erection of this new church would rename the street it's on. Church Lane was previously known as Back Lane instead. This building, a simple pared back design in the decorated style, is the work of the architects James Mallison and Thomas Healy. The vestry wall contains some Romanesque carvings, and the rest of the building contains stone carvings by Robert Moore, which date from 1852. It should be noted, by the way, that the original St James's Church was a chapel of ease to Aldborough. Next, via a narrow lane opposite the vicarage, we're heading towards New Row. Okay, so at the end of that little lane, if you take a right turn, you're heading back into the town centre. This is where most of Boroughbridge's main amenities and shops and facilities and all that kind of stuff are located. There's also some interesting landmarks in this town centre too. There's a museum, for example, which we'll catch right at the very end of this walk. Entering the high street, the first thing you'll see is a pub called the Black Bull, the oldest in the town. Now this claims to be a 13th century inn, but as we know from previous episodes, that's impossible. As a pub, it was likely founded in the 17th or 18th century, but it is built on foundations that go back to 1278. That means there is perhaps a tiny bit of truth to its claim. Oh, and by the way, it also has a resident ghost too, who's fond of moving chairs apparently. In any event, we're further up the high street now. There's at least 3 bakeries in this town centre, so you're good for food here. So how come Boroughbridge is now the main town here and not Aldborough? The answer is all to do with the Normans. They moved the River Eures crossing point to its present site in the late 11th century, and a community began to grow up around it. The first bridge was built of wood, but was rebuilt in stone in the 16th century. Boroughbridge was the 44th new town to be created by the Normans, and it rapidly grew in importance as a river and road centre. In 1115, together with Aldborough and several other local villages, it became part of the honour of Knaresborough. Perhaps the most iconic site in the town is the Market Well. This goes by many different names. It's effectively a water pump with a well underneath. Its extravagant canopy is perhaps the most ornate in England. The well itself is 256 feet deep, and that makes it the deepest in the country. The structure was given as a gift to the town by Mrs. Lawson of Aldborough Manor in 1875 in memory of her husband Andrew, who had died 3 years earlier. Several notable buildings surround the well. One of them is the old National School, which is now the library and community centre. It was built in 1832. Now, when Church Lane was Back Lane, it continued north over York Road. The northern arm is still called Back Lane today, and it contains a small fire station. This would replace a much older fire station on Horsefair, which would later be used by Searles Carpets. Did you spot it earlier in the route? Now we're into Hall Square, which has the War Memorial. Note the white cottages lining its edge. They were built as fishermen's cottages and originally extended further along the banks of the River Tut. The memorial itself is a white marble figure said to represent faith. It has a total of 37 names. And the reason this is called Hall Square is because Boroughbridge Hall is nearby. This Grade 2 listed country house dates back to the late 17th century and it's surrounded by gardens, riverside grounds and paddocks. Hall Square also has the town council office and in turn that has a parish notice board. Mark off Boroughbridge everybody, Harrogate is down to 89. With that, there's only one major landmark left. Heading up Fishergate and back to Horsefair, you'll pass by the Boroughbridge Social Club on the right hand side, which is neatly nestled within another row of shops. Okay, so I'm back at the beginning. It's taken me about an hour and a half to walk around Boroughbridge. Lovely little walk around, to be honest with you, and the weather's stayed okay too. It's always a bonus. Hopefully this video has gone a little way to proving that this isn't just your average North Yorkshire town. And it's a town that's growing in size as well. This walk is mainly focused on the centre of the town and the bits that are sort of just around the edge. But just to the south of everything, there are some new houses being built. Let's go and see those to finish this off. Yes indeed, Boroughbridge has a lot more south of the town and it's an area that's only getting bigger as the years progress. Mind you, this particular landmark has been here for quite a while. This is the town's Morrison's supermarket. I am actually very familiar with this particular branch. When travelling up and down the A1, Boroughbridge is a favourite stop-off point for food and fuel, so that I can avoid vastly overinflated motorway services prices. This Morrison's store is literally just off the A1M and it's very handy. Speaking of the A1, it's very easy to get to from here. All you have to do is follow Wetherby Road and voila, you're at it. Boroughbridge sits at junction 48, which has a highways depot on its eastern side. To bring this video full circle, we need the Aldborough Road, just off to the left before a junction with the A168. This goes to Aldborough and until recently it was a drive through the countryside. That's certainly not the case these days. In much the same way as Milby and Langthorpe, brand new houses have been built down here on an industrial scale. Lots have been built already, but some of them are still going up now. It would be virtually impossible to show you them all, so I've opted to drive up just the one in particular. This is Highwayman Road, a historical reference to the criminal past of the Great North Road. Several other streets up here have historical names too. Stagecoach Drive, Stable Mews and Staging Post Close are all Great North Road related, whilst Wagon Close and Drover Place preserve some of the agricultural history of the town. Then of course there's Deer Way, cementing the area's hugely important status in Roman times. And that'll do us everybody. Now from tomorrow onwards, TVI is going to look and sound a little different. Join me at 6 tomorrow to see exactly what I mean. Thanks for watching this video, folks. Don't forget to like this episode if you haven't already. It really makes a difference with YouTube. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel for more videos like this and give us a share too if you've got friends who'd like it. You can find all the links to my social media accounts below, as well as my Buy Me a Coffee page where you can donate to the channel. Also, if you've enjoyed this episode, have a look at some more videos in this series. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as the Village Idiot, and I'm out.